Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Law of Relevancy podcast, where we bring you marketing and communications industry professionals and sometimes founders of companies to talk about topics that help make your career and life more relevant. Today we have Jim Albert. Thank you, Jim, for joining us.
Hi, Cords. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Jim is from Neptune Flood Insurance. He is the founder and chairman of Neptune Flood Insurance. And I'm your host, Cords Owen, and I'm also the CEO and president of Bake More Pies, a full-service marketing agency here in Tampa, Florida. Well, Jim, thanks for joining us. I'm very excited to have you on the show today. We've got an exciting topic. We're going to be talking a lot about innovation. And I think what you've done in the last 3-4 years now with Neptune
Hard
Flood
to believe, yes.
it's pretty exciting. Yeah. It's come a long way. So just so that everybody can understand a little bit of your background, you've worked with some pretty big companies and have had clients for some of the biggest companies in the world, correct?
I have. It's funny that I'm working for a company that has 15 people now, Cords, and
but
when the company that I started with out of college, AT&T,
I've heard of them,
had 1 million employees.
Oh my goodness!
It was the biggest company on earth.
Oh my goodness! And then you've had clients like Sony and Microsoft back in the early 2000s.
I did, yeah. When I was with AT&T for a number of years, and then moved over into IT consulting, and right on the top of the .com bubble bursting. But we worked with Microsoft and Sony and lots of other Hewlett Packard and companies that were just getting into the internet stage and doing their first online presence.
Gotcha. So the reason I bring that up is because, even though, you look at AT&T and some of how they've transitioned over the time, you've been exposed to gigantic company processes, some of what they've accomplished, technology they've brought to bear and whatnot. And I think maybe some of those lessons have kind of shown up in what you've built there at Neptune.
Yeah, very, very much so. And I think one of the big changes in starting a company is you've worked with big companies. Well, in big companies, there's always someone that does that.
Right.
So whatever you need done, there's someone that does that. And whereas in a startup, there's only one person to do that, and that's yourself or you and one other. You know that from starting your company. And it's the same thing of setting up the bank accounts and doing the licensing and paying the taxes and paperwork and everything around that. And oh yeah, you still need to build a product and build a company and get customers.
Yeah.
But it's very different than being in a big, massive corporation.
Sure. So let's just talk a little bit more about the history of where you've come from. So before you started Neptune, we'll get into some of the success at Neptune scene. But it was 4-5 years ago. Like, bring us back to that moment where you said, "Okay, I've been worked in the financial world. Now I'm going to do something totally different."
Yeah. So a little bit of more background. I lived overseas. I was in London, and in 2012 I decided to come back to the States, and a friend of mine offered me the role of CIO of his insurance company.
Oh wow.
I thought, okay, well, I can do that. I'm not sure where St. Petersburg, Florida is, but that sounds good. And came and learned a little bit about insurance over those 3 years. But after 3 years, and in 2015, 2016, decided it was time to go do something for myself. And that something at the time was essentially a career sabbatical. So my wife and I bought an RV, threw the dogs in the RV, drove north with no agenda, no reservations, and we got to mid to northern Maine. We were way up past Acadia.
Oh wow.
A good ways up there, and the rain was hammering down one day, and we went to a coffee shop to get Wi-Fi access for a change, and we sat there with our computers. And this is about 2 weeks into our trip, and after about an hour she said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I just started a company." And so all it took was 2 weeks. I thought I was doing she said, "I thought we were doing a 6-month sabbatical, and then maybe you'd even retire." I said, "No, can't do it."
So again, we're talking about a little bit about innovation today, and it sounds to me like what you're saying is you had sort of separated from where you were, and you guys were going to try to take some time off, and you cleared your head, and your head was clear for 2 weeks, and then you decided, okay, I've got this new thing I want to try.
Yeah, I think you need, or at least I know I did. I need that kind of downtime to actually clear the mental airwaves to think about what comes next. Think 3 months or 6 months or a year down the road, and it took a coffee shop in Maine for that to happen. But
And some rain.
yeah, well, it hit me like a blinding, obvious opportunity of things that were changing. I think some of the things going on were the high speed computing had changed,
Sure.
data analytics all of a sudden had changed, online purchasing. You think
Yeah, big
about
data was huge back then.
big data was just blossoming, and then retail was changing to be almost a totally online experience. What do you not buy online these days?
That's right.
One thing, pretty much, flood insurance.
That's
so
right.
so I thought this is a really really good opportunity that I don't think I can pass up.
So you had some experience. So it's not like you started a company. You said, "Okay, I'm going to start this company," and it was something you had zero experience in. You already had experience in the P&C space, P&C, property and casualty insurance, correct?
Right. Yeah.
And so, looking back at some of your previous experience, where you see these behemoths of companies that you're working with, I mean, they're accomplishing amazing things, but they don't move very fast, do they?
Right. Right. And I think that's why we've been really successful with Neptune is there aren't layers of bureaucracy to go through to ask permission to do something. I've made so many mistakes over the last 4 years,
Yeah.
lots of them. But you make them on a small scale, and you learn
Sure.
from it instantly, and then you just move on. So we keep running laps because we're very small and able to keep each project very small, start to finish.
Absolutely. Well, I think Thomas Edison was famous about his comments on mistakes and failure and
Right.
whatnot, right?
Right.
He did
Yeah.
pretty well. So let's talk about that. So I want to kind of get in. So you identified this opportunity that, hey, maybe there's some inefficiency in the way that this product is purchased or researched or whatnot. I mean, tell me a little bit about. So just for those of you who don't know, so Neptune Flood Insurance. So they are a flood insurance carrier that sells 38 states now. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep.
In 38 states across the country, growing very, very fast. And the uh, the history of flood insurance is most of that's done through the NFIP, correct?
That's
So
right.
National Flood Insurance.
So more than 90% of the policies in the country, and there are only 5 million policies in the country, but more than 90% of them are through the government program.
Right.
But just now, in the last couple, 3 years, have other companies come out, such as Neptune and some of our competitors, come out and offered a private product.
Sure. But, so the 90% of the market, that's based off. How old is that technology that's based off of?
Oh gosh, about 40 years old.
So
In some cases, the flood maps are 1980s level before even there were digital mapping technologies.
wow.
So to buy a flood, well, no one ever woke up in the morning and said, "I can't wait to buy insurance today."
Yeah.
That never happened, and it's certainly true. I mean, think about it; it's a miserable experience. You've got to fill out all this paperwork, and it's a language that I hardly understand. They ask you about AAL and PML. What are these things?
Yeah. What's an elevation certificate, and where do
Right.
you get one?
And then,
Right.
by the way, you have to pay $250 to go get your elevation certificate. And then you have to wait 30 days. That's not the retail buying experience these days.
And if you're buying a home in a flood zone, you have to have all that work done right before you can close.
You have to. So it's mandatory in a flood zone, and that's about 5 million policies in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
But the need is more like 60 million policies.
So the 60 million those are places where it could potentially like has flooded before.
Those
Is
are
that
houses that are at risk.
okay?
So and at a significant risk of flooding. So think about it. More
Gotcha.
than 90% of the people that should have flood insurance don't.
So it seems like you were able to find this sweet spot of an opportunity where you had some familiarity in the industry. You probably had some contacts within the industry too. You've got this government-run 50 or 40-year-old program, an archaic technology, and an archaic buying experience.
Right.
And so this thing was just ripe for modernizing.
It just seemed like such a good opportunity. But there were some things missing, of course. So
Okay.
so I had to, once I decided to start a company, well, then the idea is almost the easy part. Then what do you do to go actually make it happen? So so my co-founder, a guy named Bill Martin, who's a
Mm-hmm.
genius with data analytics and a veteran of Progressive Insurance and Farmers Insurance, he and I founded the company, and then shortly after that added Stephanie Lee, who's just fantastic, knowledgeable. No one's better at building a distribution network. Brad Schultz joined me as CTO, who's
Sure.
out of this world good for the whole technology stack. And then shortly after that, Jim Steiner joined. One of the big things, and people that go and start companies, the number one thing that takes startups down is actually not lack of money or a poor business plan. It's actually compliance. They miss something, they cut corners, and you're trying to do everything. You're not even aware of everything that has to be done. So it's easy to see how that happens. So bringing a guy in like Jim Steiner, who's all about banking compliance and also a great data analytics guy, was kind of rounded out the management team.
So you've got distribution, you've got admin and legal compliance, you have technology, and just a super strong team. It seems like you've got one heck of a team that you've helped put together over there.
So there's one other big building block,
Sure.
and that's, as a startup, you have to get cash at some
Right.
point. It was the bank of Jim Albert for a little while, and longer than I would have
Well,
wanted
most
it
of
to
the
be.
people innovating or listening to this, they're going to be thinking, oh my God. I mean, so like you've basically taken on and you are now seen as one of like these insurtech leaders in terms of your company at this really high place. And in the beginning, it was just you. So how in the world does somebody with their own bank account build a multi-million dollar company in just a few years? Like how in the world do you possibly do that and take on some of the largest corporations, billions and multi-billion dollar corporations?
Yeah, yeah, it's a really good question. I think 10 years ago it would not have been possible to scale that quickly, because what do you need? You need technology infrastructure. So 10 years ago, you would have needed a database and servers and lots of IT infrastructure that would have cost $50 to $100,000
Sure.
alone, and needed experts to come administer all that. Now we just dial up volume from Amazon Web Services or from Microsoft's Azure platform, and you've got bandwidth.
That's right.
You've got database, and the same thing about creating a website or creating a logo or a tagline. All those things through crowdsourcing or through freelancing networks are much faster. So that helped. That helped it go really fast. But I think the main thing was that there was no there was no comparable product in the market. You couldn't go online and say, enter your address, say, tell me how much flood insurance will cost. Now you can do that in auto, maybe. You can
Right.
certainly do that if you want to buy a computer or something like that. But you couldn't do it in flood insurance. So we actually created that. And the revelation of, oh my gosh, I can enter my address and I can see what it will cost. That drove all this demand into Neptune.
Yeah, well, full transparency. So I actually have Neptune flood insurance.
Thank you.
And I remember it was like a week before we were closing on our townhome. They were like, oh, by the way, you need flood insurance. And if I'd have tried to buy the traditional product, there's no way I could have been able to close when I was scheduled to close.
Mm-hmm. You would
So,
have lost 30 days. Yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's definitely a big deal. So let's talk about how you get from Jim Albert, now of St. Petersburg, right,
Uh-huh.
to this company with 22,000 clients. Like, how do you get there? Like, if somebody told you a few years ago, "Hey, Jim, I want you to create this company," like could like that seems like a gigantic thing to
Right.
look at. Like,
Right.
hey, can you just go chisel out Mount Rushmore real quick?
Yeah,
You know?
exactly. Yeah, if that question had come up when I was sitting in that cafe in Maine, of in 3 years, just go, build a company that's in 38 states with the largest flood insurance company in the country and the only direct to consumer, but also a huge agent network and tons of brand recognition. I think I would have jumped in the RV, and just started driving further north
Yeah.
to make it
Here
go
comes
away.
Canada. Exactly.
But it's actually like 1,000 small projects,
Okay.
and so you got to keep your eye on the end game, of course. But the first thing is establish a company, get an LLC, and then next step is create a logo. Next step is you just sequentially go through these 1,000 projects, and as long as you can learn fast and fix them fast, then it actually is very very doable. One big thing though that I wanted to mention was getting uh, investors into the company. So any startup at some point, usually you exhaust your own cash, and you want to share the opportunity in some way. And that's a really hard decision. Do you want a strategic investor, or do you want a passive investor? Do you want someone's network, or do you want them actively involved in the business? You have to make all those decisions, and it's like a marriage.
So can you help us with that process? Can
It,
you give us some advice?
yeah, it's well, one thing is it's a relationship like a marriage. So you've got to view your relationship with that investor as, can I work with this person for a very long period of time? Because we're trying to create a sustainable company. We're not trying to create a company that three and done and we're out. No, this is a long-term venture to really help people find insurance that haven't been able to get it in the past. And and I got really lucky. I met with a lot of people and had a lot of people that were interested in investing in Neptune. But in the end, Trevor Burgess came in, who was the founder of C1 Bank, was with Morgan Stanley before that, and has been that strategic and active investor that's brought a ton of value to the business. So that's, in addition to your core team, your core management team, that investor decision is just really crucial.
And Trevor's the current CEO.
Trevor and I just swapped roles. So Trevor is now the CEO of the company, and I'm the chairman of the company. Yeah.
Wow, that's all right. So that's some advice on how to find like the right investor, right? Then so the next thing, we talk about focus a little bit. So you mentioned 1,000 small projects. Did it help at all that flood insurance is kind of a standalone product? I mean, it seems like everything that you're doing, those all needed to go towards rating, delivering, servicing those policies, right?
Mm-hmm. It should have. If I was starting bank accounts and I was doing licensing and all
That's
that.
true, yeah.
But eventually,
Joys
yes,
of
you just
entrepreneurship.
have to focus on build the product and build the distribution network, and every day know that you move the ball forward on each of those things.
In distribution network, so for people who aren't familiar with the insurance world, so distribution, that's through agents, that's selling direct.
That's your sales channel. So that's through carriers, it's direct, it's through agents, and we're 96% agent driven. Agents are a vital and really important part of the process.
Right. But even still, agents still have to rate the product, right? They still have to rate like what the price of their clients' flood insurance is going to be. So y'all made that pretty easy. So my understanding, it takes about 3 minutes to get a quote for your flood
If you
insurance.
go really really slow, yes, it'll take up to 3 minutes, but you can probably churn it out in about 30 seconds
Wow.
if you've done it a few times.
Wow, that's incredible. So you were able to attract these really powerful teammates and these investors, and then of course you have to have clients, right? And you have to have supply. So tell me a little bit about how does someone, let's say for example, there's a VP of marketing that's watching this, um, or another entrepreneur who wants to start something. So how do you know that the money and the time and everything, your life that you're putting into this is going to pay off? How do you do that? So do you have to check in with your stakeholders, like your end clients? Like tell me a little bit about that process.
It's a concept. You don't know. That's one thing. And with a startup, you don't know that it's going to pay off. But the way to manage that bet is to have stakeholders, have mentors, have agents that we consulted with all the time, have carriers, have Lloyd's of London was great on the different entities within Lloyd's and giving us feedback of, well, that seems like a really good idea, and that doesn't seem like a good idea. Here's why it won't work. So constantly calibrating our product into
So you
something
would
that
actually have
users demand.
conversations with one of your, is it called an underwriter? Like a, is that,
That's right. Yeah.
so you would
Yeah.
actually have conversations with them about
You're starting
directions
to
that,
sound like an insurance guy here, Cord. So
yeah,
you're
well,
doing really well.
yeah. So you're actually having conversations with your stakeholders and checking in with them on the direction of your company, and getting their buy-in whether or not they would like that.
Right, and early on in our life in 2017, we went out with a beta product. We
Mhm.
put it into the market and said, "This is what we think will work." And it was one of those startup moments that we realized very quickly it was not going to work at all, and we needed to change the way we did the business. It was still flood insurance and it was still private flood to the residential market, but we needed to significantly change how we delivered that.
Got it.
And so we did that. We kind of stopped the line for about 3 months and then put our current product in the market in late 2017, which is now on version 61, by the way, but the current product is still the one that we put in the market in late
I
2017.
think that's really important that that you made that comment about how you had to change. So the underlying technology of what you were rating and measuring the risk for, a lot of that logic probably didn't change so much, but maybe the way you delivered it or whatever. So I'm guessing, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me like your IT experience probably played a big role in making sure that you built it the right way to where you could be flexible.
Yeah, that's right. It was, we didn't build this monolithic structure. We created an architecture that could change and evolve as new data sources came in, or new technologies came available, or different database sources, or whatever, anything around the technology stack. We've changed out probably every aspect of the technology stack at least once.
So in that way, would it be almost an advantage to be a small company versus?
Very much so. I think a lot of our competitors, and I think this is true of any industry, this is not just an insurance comment, but you look at the new entrants into insurance in our experience, the ones that were coming into the flood insurance space, they were big homeowners companies that said, "Hey, let's try flood." And they'd assign a couple people to do it on the side, and it would take years between the decision
Right.
cycles in the company, and it wasn't their core focus. Well, all we do is flood. The only product we have in the market right now. Now our technology is probably scalable to a lot of other products, but the only thing we have in the market now is flood, and so we're
And
able to laser focus on that and get it to market.
and so you started the company was started with flood for residential properties,
Yes.
and then
Yeah.
so what's next
So
for
commercial
Neptune?
flood. So commercial flood is coming out. We're in January 2020, and commercial flood is coming out in the next week or so.
So business owners can get a quote.
Yes, small business owners can get a flood product, and some of the rules have changed. So the Small Business Administration is encouraging private flood or accepting private flood as an option, and that creates more options for business owners to get coverage.
Well, it sounds like you timed quite a lot of things pretty well.
Well, Mother Nature is a huge marketing arm. I don't wish this on anyone, but you look at the changes in the real big change is what's going on with the weather.
Sure.
And Hurricane Harvey or Hurricane Florence. Remember, like, if you're around for Andrew or Katrina, those storms came through in a hurry. They were terrible and really harsh, but they moved through very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now we're seeing Florence and Harvey and Imelda. These storms come in and then just sit there and dump 40 or 50 inches of rain. That's unprecedented.
Right.
The Midwest floods last year in 2019 were some towns were underwater for 3 months. That's really unusual. But Hurricane Dorian to spin up out of the Atlantic, the strongest storm ever out of the Atlantic basin, or king tides.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be a once a year or twice a year event tied to the lunar cycle, and you'd get flooding in the streets of Fort Lauderdale or Miami. Well, now it's a monthly event, and all up and down the East Coast. This is this is going to continue, I'm afraid.
Well, you're betting on it. you've got a flood
I
company.
don't want it. I don't wish it on anyone.
Yeah.
I just wish they would have coverage so that, like in Hurricane Harvey, 80% of the people that had losses were not covered. And that's just a tragedy.
Right.
We're trying to help solve that problem of the coverage gap in insurance so you don't have thousands of people surprised that they're not covered by their homeowners
Sure.
insurance.
So let's talk a little bit more about innovation in the process of like what it has felt going through this whole thing, because you were Jim Albert, the entrepreneur, shoestringing everything together out of your own checking account, pulling together team members and people that believed in you. And now company's profitable and you're almost on like the other side. Can you tell us a little bit about what that journey's felt like?
Yeah, my wife says, I can't believe you didn't shut it down about 3 or 4 times, and but you just keep going. There are so many hard moments and offset by just I can't believe what we just did. Those highest highs and lowest lows all occur, as I'm sure you've seen with Bake More Pies. They're just some of the really great moments are offset by some really, really tough
Sometimes
ones.
they happen in the same day.
That's
Yeah.
right. They're back to back.
That's right.
Um, but I think it's changed a little bit in the market recently that you look at a company like WeWork that was valued recently at $47 billion dollars, and now it's been this spectacular implosion. Or Uber is still losing, pick a number, $800 million dollars per quarter. And and the market seems to be valuing something different, which I think is back to a more traditional value, which is make a company sustainable in the long run and make it profitable. Make it
Sure.
that it's something that can continue to employ people and deliver value to their customers. So from day one, we've focused on let's make this a long-term profitable company.
So think small.
Think think small, and we didn't run out and do giant capital raises so that we could spend money left and right. We haven't done that. We're a small company of 15 people, and if we quadruple in size this year, we might actually even be 18 people.
Well, that's the beauty of these technology companies that you're hearing about, where they're worth tens, hundreds, sometimes billions of dollars, and they may have a dozen people working for them. It's
They may
amazing.
be.
It's in
We
the
just don't want
algorithm.
to build a house of cards like some of the others. We want to build a sustainable value company, and and really, to me, there needs to be a higher calling. I'm not just looking to go spin up a bunch of money and then ride off into the sunset. The, I wanted to start something that made a difference to people. And if you look at flood insurance, whereas in auto, everybody has auto insurance, everybody has homeowners insurance, but actually 90% of the people that should have flood insurance don't have it at all and don't understand it.
Sure.
So really, we're as much an education company as we are a technology company delivering a solution that is very much needed in the market.
Well, so education ties closely into communications, and a lot of the people that watch this podcast are in the communications field. So, do you have anything planned um, as it relates to educating consumers or small business owners when it comes to education? Is there anything upcoming?
Well, I'm relying on you to help me with that, as you have very much so. Um, we're trying. I think it's a multi-channel approach. Some
Okay.
people learn by reading. Some people learn by watching something. Some people learn by their social media feed. Some people learn by word of mouth or through a trusted source like agents. Some people learn through affinity programs where AARP or Home Depot is advocating this solution. And we're trying to go through all those different avenues so there's as much opportunity for a consumer or a small business owner to learn about what kind of coverage they need to have.
And you have a podcast coming out too,
And we
right?
do, thank you,
Okay.
yes. And we'll be starting a podcast with some of our top agents and some of our top business partners to share their message and also help educate people about flood insurance.
So, is the topic of that podcast to help educate other agents and also consumers on how to be
It is,
successful
yep.
with?
It's targeted to both because they're pathways to success for selling insurance and insurance is a people perceive it as a complicated product. I mean, think about it, that the best thing that happens when you buy insurance is nothing.
Right.
So you pay your $1,000 or whatever for your insurance, and if nothing happens, it means you didn't have a claim. So you could feel like you didn't get any return on that. Now, if you have a claim, that's not really a good event. It means
Right.
that at least you were insured,
You're just trying
but
to
you
be,
had a loss that
yeah,
you're trying to offset.
hopefully you're made whole. I mean, that's what indemnity means, right? It's the
Yeah,
definition to be made whole, right?
yeah,
But
yeah,
nobody can give you that time back.
yeah. So this podcast is about helping um, share the word and help educate people about their need for insurance and how that's actually a good investment. It's equivalent to an investment because your most valuable asset is usually your home, certainly one of your top assets.
Gotcha. So just to get back into, so one last trip around the innovation, is there any advice
Mm.
you would have for people who are trying to break out, trying to either innovate inside of a corporation, a small company, for themselves? Like, is there any advice you'd give those people, whether it's to be brave or, you know, what is that?
Well, there are a couple ways of looking at that. One is if you are thinking about starting a company, or you have actively started a company, cut the cord and go do it. It's if you're already that far down the path, then you've got the skills to try it, and if it succeeds, great. But if it doesn't, you're absolutely marketable throughout the industry.
So you're
You've got
saying even if you fail, that job experience of going through that process actually makes you more qualified to be hired by someone else?
absolutely, yes, yes, I believe that. Um, so that's one thing, is to just go for it and try. Um, this isn't just a message though for startups. So you've got big companies, and so much of the innovation occurs within big companies right now. Every company we do business with, I think, has their own innovation group or their own
Right.
ventures group, and so if you've got that hankering, then try to go through one of those channels as well. You could actually get started on a path to innovation and startup through the big companies at the same time.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think that's one of the biggest lessons I learned in entrepreneurship is that you've got venture capitalists, angel investors, and even big companies who are just starving for great ideas. So if you have a great idea or you've built something, you should go put it in front of them if your goal is to raise capital, because they need ideas. They need your, because they have to create these venture uh, operations outside of their mainstream of doing business to actually make it possible, right?
Mm-hmm. Look at universities. Every one, I think, has a Shark Tank like environment,
Incubator,
and
yeah.
classes and incubators, and especially the MBA schools have a lot of programs where people come out and they don't ever go work for Deloitte or Bain. They go directly and start their own company.
Sure. So your
Yeah.
advice is just to go do it. If you feel strongly enough that there's a need, go figure out a way to do it.
Yes, and there are a million potholes you can step in, and so the thing is to build that network of mentors and advisors around you that can help you chart your course. Because if you try and go it alone, it's really really hard.
Very good. So, Jim, where can people follow you? Where can people learn about the rest of this journey?
So you can follow us. I'd say follow me on NeptuneFlood.com. You can go to our LinkedIn site, onto our Facebook account. We are always putting out information about the flood insurance business and about starting a company, and all that is available through those channels as well.
Got it.
Yeah.
And you can follow us in this podcast on Bake More Pie's social channels. We post it on Facebook. We'll post it on Twitter, Instagram. And thank you again for joining us on this episode of the Law of Relevancy podcast. I'm your host, Cords Owen. Thank you, Jim, for joining us.
Thank you, Cords.
Until
Appreciate
next
it very
time.
much.